Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. Jessica Donovan here, or if this is your first time listening, welcome. It is great to have you here. Now, today I want to talk about a Four Corners special that I watched a couple of weeks ago. It was called Generation Cancer. Did you watch it? If not, I recommend you do. I'm going to summarize what it was all about in today's episode and talk about how I want to turn this really heavy, pretty depressing topic into something that can motivate us as parents. I think it is important not to shy away from this topic just because it is very doom and gloom. You know, some of the statistics they were sharing in this episode. But I want to, as I said, turn that around into helping to inspire you as parents and me myself as well, in terms of things that we can do to reduce our children's chance of being one of these statistics. So this episode, this Four Corners program, you know, it definitely left me with a lump in my throat. It left me feeling like, wow, this is pretty heavy stuff. This is pretty frightening stuff. But also it left me feeling, inspired to share more and really sort of lit up and motivated to do what we've always done here at Natural Super Kids, which is to inspire and motivate and inform and educate parents on how to care for their kids' health. And really, we look at that in a few different ways. We focus a lot on food and nutrition. We focus a lot on reducing toxins and chemicals, which is the key thing we're going to be focusing on in this, podcast series. We talk a lot about healthy lifestyle habits, and we talk about utilizing more natural medicines, more of the tools that we have in our naturopathic medicine kit, if you like, herbal medicines, nutritional medicine, homeopathy, to support our kids' health. And all of these things can really, are really relevant to what we're talking about today, which is cancer and the scary statistics that were shared in this Four Corners program. Now, I know everyone listening, or most of you listening, are already very health conscious, parents. And it can feel like the weight of the world is on our shoulders. It's almost like the more you learn when it comes to health and diet and nutrition and environment and lifestyle, the more sort of scary it can feel, because there's so much within our Western diets and lifestyles and environments that are sort of up against us when it comes to the health of our kids. But I really want to make sure we are grounding ourselves in what we can do and not spiraling into fear and anxiety about what we cannot control. So I really want this episode and this series that comes after this episode to feel empowering and not overwhelming, although I'm sure there will be elements of overwhelm and fear within what I am sharing, but that's sort of where I'm coming from. So if you didn't watch the Four Corners report, I want to recap, what they were talking about. Basically they were talking about the rates of cancer in young people. So cancer rates in people under 50 have doubled globally over the past 3 decades. And here in Australia, our stats are very high. And so, there's no one reason as to why this is. But I think in terms of what we do and what we focus on here at Natural Super Kids, there's a lot of relevant stuff, which I'm going to get to soon. So older people still make up most cancer cases, but they were talking about the cohort effect, which means that younger generations are starting to get cancer earlier, and we will likely see even higher rates as we age. So Dr. Philip Rosenberg, who is a leading US cancer biostatistician, I think that's how you say that word, was saying that it's really scary and astonishing. He said the actual number of young people with cancer are still relatively low to older people, but they're unlikely to stay low. If researchers are right, and if the trajectory of what we're seeing continues, the rise in younger adults will get worse as it's compounded by the effects of aging. So he said that if things stay on the current trajectories, then we can expect that they would continue to experience these proportionate increases as they get older. And he predicts that cancer rates in people born in the 70s, that's me, could be double those born in the 50s. So that's, my parents' generation. So it's pretty scary. And, he was also talking about the fact that these stats, again, if they continue to follow the current trajectories, are only going to get worse for our kids' generation. And so some of the stats that were shared, that the rise in rates of cancer in 30 to 39-year-olds, so people under 40 even, are, hugely increasing. So, for example, prostate cancer in 30 to 39-year-olds has gone up by 500%, pancreatic cancer by 200%, colorectal cancer by 173%. And in these sort of more the cancers that are being seen more prominently in those younger people, 30 to 39-year-olds, thyroid, uterine, kidney, cervical, testicular, and breast cancer as well. So these stats are, pretty eye-opening and scary. The other thing that was said that, makes it very concerning is that a lot of these cancers are diagnosed at a later stage. And this, could be due to a number of factors. And a lot of it, potentially because younger people are not thinking, oh, this could be cancer, this, symptom that I have. And as we know, a lot of cancers can be asymptomatic or can have sort of symptoms that can mean a lot of different things. So a lot of these cancers that are diagnosed in younger people are at a later stage by the time they're diagnosed, which means that they're more likely to have invaded surrounding tissue and spread, leading to more surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and ultimately poorer outcomes for these young people. So it's very sad. And I think, we probably can all think of someone either within our close circle or our wider circle or our community, or even, people that we've come across on social media. I know my social media feed, is full of stories of young people being diagnosed with cancer as well. I think because I'm in the health sector and I'm looking at a lot of health and nutrition and alternative healing sort of stuff on my social media, this might pop up more for me. But I think we can all think of those stories of young people that are being diagnosed with cancer without the genetic predisposition, and we hear, and this Four Corners episode had stories of people that there was a lady who had been diagnosed with cancer, and she was not a smoker, she was not a drinker, she was not overweight, she didn't have any of those risk factors that are often associated with cancer. So there's a lot of question marks when it comes to some of these young people that are being diagnosed with cancer. So what was talked about in this episode as well, which really ties into what we are all about here at Natural Super Kids, were some of the risk factors that were identified to be correlated with cancer in general and thought to be a factor in young people, getting more cancer. They are things like our heavily processed Western style diets, that are lacking in fiber, that are lacking in nutrition, that are full of artificial flavors and additives and high in sugar. So our Western diets have a huge part to play. There was also talk about the gut microbiome. And, as if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you'll know that we talk about the gut microbiome a lot and how important the gut microbiome is when it comes to our children's immune systems, their allergies, their mood and behavior, their fussy eating. We can really link, the gut microbiome and how healthy or unhealthy it is to so many areas of our kids' health. And they're now talking a lot about the gut microbiome and how that is involved. Imbalances in the gut microbiome could be involved in cancer as well. And I did do a previous episode on sharing some more information on that. I will make sure the link to that is in the show notes because I cannot remember off the top of my head what episode it was. It wasn't too long ago. It was about some research that came out talking about how certain alterations or dysbiosis or imbalances within the gut microbiome have now been linked to cancer later in life. So that's really interesting as well. So the gut microbiome, our diet. The other big thing is our widespread exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals and toxins. This is huge, and this is where we're going to focus over the next few weeks in this podcast is some simple things that you can do as a parent to start to reduce your kids' exposure, your family's exposure to toxins and chemicals. We've got to focus on what we have got control of. Yes, there are things within our wider environment that we don't have control of, but we really want to focus on, what is in our control. So that exposure to toxins and chemicals, it's so hard to know exactly what impact that is having on our health overall because it's so hard to study. There might be studies on particular specific chemicals, but what about the blend of or the combination of a whole heap of different chemicals that our kids might be exposed to in their food, in their water, in their environment, within our homes? And so, exposure to toxins and chemicals is thought to play a big part when it comes to cancer. Overuse of antibiotics was talked about as well, particularly the impact that has on the gut microbiome. So that's really interesting. And again, we've talked about that previously on the podcast. And lack of exercise, poor sleep, stress, all of these things are thought to have an impact as well. And they talked about that this is the first generation where multiple compounding risk factors are showing up early, and we're now seeing those effects. And so these things are taking time to really affect our health. And that's the other thing that makes research really tricky. So they were talking about that given cancer can take decades to develop, decades in a 30-year-old that is now being diagnosed with cancer takes you back to early childhood or even, your mum's pregnancy. One theory is that back then something happened to mothers and kids' microbiomes, the bugs in their bowels. I'm reading this from the article that I'll link in the show notes as well. Eating ultra-processed foods, antibiotic use, increased cesarean births where babies don't acquire the normal gut microbiome, potentially made our guts more vulnerable to dangerous bacteria. Then there's damage from chemicals all those years ago, which might only be emerging today. And Christos, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Samidis. He's a pediatrician. He works with Minderoo Foundation on the health effects of plastic and chemical exposure, says that we have a blind spot around environmental chemicals and cancer. It's a big blind spot with micro and nanoplastics in our food and drinking water, persistent chemicals like PFAS in products like cosmetics, non-stick frying pans and stain-resistant fabrics. Much is still unknown and there's little transparency. So we're going to dive into some of those chemicals in in episodes coming up on this series and talk about what we can do as parents to minimize our exposure to those. So we're going to, I'm going to be sharing more information about that. But I do want to talk a little bit here about health anxiety as well, because I was really umming and ahhing about whether to share more on this, because I know that we have a lot of parents within our community that do struggle with health anxiety. And so we can, start to think, am I doing enough? Am I missing something? Am I failing my kids? All of these are very normal thoughts to be having. And it's a really fine balance between, falling into this doom and gloom sort of health anxiety state when it comes to thinking about this and feeling like this is so much bigger than anything that I can have control over. But I think it's really important to come back to, this is something to be aware of. It's not something we need to, rehaul our entire life about. It's focusing on the small, simple things that we can do to improve our kids' diet, their nutrition, their gut microbiome, their exposure to toxins and chemicals. And these are all things that we help with here at Natural Super Kids. So I want to, assure you that as a parent, it is not our job to prevent every possible illness. That is an impossible mission. Our job is to lay the strong foundations and focus on the things that are within our control. We don't have to have that all or nothing mindset, which is where we can land when we're feeling really overwhelmed or anxious. It's like either we have to do everything possible to, make sure our kids don't struggle with any health issues, or it feels too overwhelming and we're frozen in overwhelm. So we just want to make sure that we are approaching this from with a balanced approach, and focusing on that next step, that next little change that we can make to improve our kids' health, their nutrition, and reduce their exposure to some of these toxins and chemicals, which, as I said, we're going to talk more about in upcoming episodes. So we really want to be reducing our kids' risk by taking a step-by-step approach. We want to be supporting our kids' resilience, and we want to be building in healthy habits without feeling like we have to be perfect. A part of what is really challenging for parents is that no matter how much knowledge we have and are encouraging our kids to, do, to eat, to live, to stay off screens, to get outside, whatever it might be, our kids are their own people. And, I'm finding that more and more now that my kids are teenagers. We cannot force our kids to, take part in healthy lifestyle habits, or we cannot force them to eat certain foods or not eat certain foods. So we are there to guide them, to lay the foundations. And I just want to say, my kids are far from perfect. Now they're teenagers, and I could be, and I do worry a little bit about that, in terms of, sometimes they might be out with their friends eating rubbish, or drinking drinks that I'm talking about, like energy drinks or soft drinks, that I am appalled that they're making those choices. But I also know that I have laid, some pretty good foundations, and on the whole, I know that they are in tune with their bodies, even though they don't make the best choices every single time. So that's just an example of like how I could spiral into overwhelm and anxiety and worry about what my kids might be eating when they're out with their friends. Or I can focus on, let's make sure there's a good nutritious meal for them when they get home. Let's make sure we're still, being active as a family, getting outdoors, going on adventures, to balance out what they might be doing, when they're on their own or with their friends. So let's talk just broadly about some of the things that we can focus on. And as I said, we are going to be diving into more details in future episodes. I'm going to do a series to talk about some very simple swaps that you can that you can make and encourage your kids to make, that can make a difference to their overall sort of toxin and chemical exposure. So when it comes to food and nutrition and gut health, on the whole, if we can lean more towards those whole, unprocessed foods, real foods that come straight from a plant or an animal, less foods in packets, less foods with very long ingredient lists, then that is a step, in the right direction. Prioritize plant diversity, so eating lots of different variety of plant foods, of vegetables, of salads, of fruits, of nuts, of seeds, of different grains. If we can get more variety into our kids, that does the world of good to their gut microbiome. Don't focus so much on quantity, but focus on more variety. If we can get lots of variety into our kids, that's great for their nutrition and great for their gut microbiome. When it comes to reducing toxins, we're going to be talking about that in future generations, future episodes. And I'm going to be sharing one tip in, I think, 4 or 5 episodes upcoming that you can do that are going to make a really big difference to your kids' overall chemical and toxin exposure. So we're going to be talking about things like plastics and non-stick chemicals that are used on cookware and things like that. So stay tuned for those episodes. When it comes to lifestyle, things like sunlight, physical activity, and sleep are really important. So as much of that as we can get in for our kids, the better. And, utilizing more natural remedies, more herbal medicines, nutrients. Now, we talk a lot and empower parents on exactly how to do that in the Natural Super Kids Club. This is our membership program where we support and inspire and educate parents to make these healthy changes that we're talking about. So I'll pop the link to the waitlist for the Natural Super Kids Club in the show notes, so you can have a look at that and pop your name down on the waitlist to find out more about the Natural Super Kids Club. But yeah, if we can be utilizing more, nutritional medicines and herbal medicines, that can really help us minimize medications such as antibiotics. Of course, antibiotics have their place, as do other medications, but if we can avoid them where possible, that's going to be great for our kids' gut microbiome. And I don't want this to be fear-mongering. If your kids need antibiotics, they need antibiotics. But I did share some episodes recently, and I'll pop the links to those in the show notes, about questions to ask to ensure that antibiotics are absolutely necessary for your child. So that's a good series to go back and listen to when you are recommended antibiotics. But there are also so many remedies and supplements and foods that we can use to ensure that our kids' immune system is robust and strong, which is really important for cancer prevention and general health overall. There's so many things that we can use to ensure that the detoxification pathways and the liver detoxification is working effectively, to make sure our children's gut microbiome and their gut overall is in good shape. And so, naturopathically, that is what we can offer in terms of, keeping your kids in robust, resilient health, and yourself as well. So if you don't know much about naturopathy or natural therapies, then stay tuned. I mean, there's so many episodes that you can go back and listen to. Check out the details of the Natural Super Kids Club in the show notes as well, if that sounds like something you are interested in. So as I said, I really want this to be an empowering series. And I want you to know that, we are the first generation of parents raising kids in this environment, and that comes back to even things like screens and social media. I think, gosh, my kids' teenage years are so different to my teenage years because of technology, is a huge part of it. So while that feels heavy and we are doing our best to navigate that, it also means that we have the power to shift the trajectory of this, whether it comes to, cancer risk or just general health and vibrancy in our kids. So we want to be focusing on those small steps, which is what I'm going to be covering in the episodes coming up. I would love to hear from you. If you've got any feedback on this episode, reach out. You can reach out to us on Instagram over at Natural Super Kids, send us a message, or you can email me, jessica@naturalsuperkids.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts, any questions that you have, and I'm always open to different topics you would like me to cover on the podcast as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week when we start to dive into some really helpful tips. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.